greetings from the Center for National Security Studies. I'm your host, Bala Subramanian, Senior Research Officer and Head of the India Strategic Studies Program at CNSS. Today, we are in a conversation with Major General N.D. Prasad, former Deputy Defense Attaché in Beijing and former Deputy Director General and Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Contemporary China Studies, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. A warm welcome, sir, and thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Bala, good evening to you and to all the participants and the audience. Thank you very much for getting me to speak with you on this important subject. It's a pleasure to be joining you in this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Moving on to the first question. Sir, today China has initiated the rapid construction of Xiaokang border villages in Tibet, close to the line of actual control, which has consequently emerged as another point of friction in the India-China relations. Could you please help our viewers understand the concept of Xiaokang and its evolution and its significance?
The concept of Xiaokang as a society is not new. When China embarked on its four modernizations under Deng Xiaoping, the concept of a Xiaokang society was actually conceived under Deng Xiaoping in 1979 as part of these four modernizations. This was, of course, reiterated subsequently by Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. And during Hu Jintao's time, he set the goal of achieving a moderately well-off society by 2020 as part of China's aims during the 16th Party Congress, and also subsequently repeated it in the next Party Congress, that is the 17th Party Congress. So therefore, the concept of a Xiaokang society has been in existence in Chinese thought process since 1979. In 2015, when Xi Jinping was already in power, he spoke of four comprehensives, which also included comprehensively building a moderately prosperous society. Reiterating what Deng Xiaoping had said, Jiang Zemin had said, and subsequently Hu Jintao. The term Xiaokang villages, as was used for the first time by the current state media, it meant structures and model villages that China would be building or has built near the LAC by using the PLA as its main force. As is well known, since the year 2006, China has implemented large-scale rehousing of rural population in Tibet Autonomous Region under the policy of comfortable housing. So therefore, this relocation of population, developing of border areas has been in existence for quite some time. Since 2012, border regions have benefited from preferential policies of the state, resulting in construction of facilities for water and electricity, roads, housing, and other infrastructure urgently needed by the people of these regions. Under Xi Jinping, eradicating rural poverty became a key, kind of a criterion for achievement of all-round Xiaokang society. So, from Xiaokang society to all-round Xiaokang society was the transition that Xi Jinping brought in, and in that, he covered the border regions. During his visit to Yunnan in January 2011 and June 2021, Xi Jinping emphasized that the development and stability of border areas is critical to China's development of the Xiaokang society. In June 2015, Xi Jinping set out the goal of lifting all of the remaining rural poor people out of poverty by 2020 as part of achieving a Xiaokang society in all respects. This was incorporated in the 13th five-year plan of China in November 2016. In 2019, as part of rural reinvigoration of Tibet Autonomous Region, government issued a plan for construction of Xiaokang villages in Tibet from 2017 to 2020. A total of 628 villages were planned in 112 border towns across 21 border counties, and in 2021, Xi Jinping announced overall Xiaokang society goal to have been achieved. Of these 628 border villages or Xiaokang villages, 427 are assessed to be in the forward tier and balance are in the second tier across the LAC. When I say forward tier, it does not mean that all of them are in the proximity of the LAC, but they are from the LAC up to a depth of about 50 to 60 kilometers. As far as allocation of funds is concerned, China allocated a total of 30.1 billion renminbi or 30,000 crores of Indian rupees for this initiative. What was the aim of these Xiaokang villages? As stated by the Chinese government, the aim of these Xiaokang villages was upliftment of the rural core in border villages or border areas, strengthen the security apparatus by consolidating all assets, intensify border management and surveillance of cross-border activities, infiltration by hostile elements, development of dual-use infrastructure which can be used by PLA in times of heightened tensions or conflict, intensify party propaganda or ideology in these areas to limit influence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and influence Tibetan rural people to view Communist Party of China in a positive light. So this, I can say, is an attempt by the Chinese government as part of a civil-military fusion strategy to also develop infrastructure which is of dual-use nature and can be used by China as part of its grey zone warfare strategy. Yeah, over to you, Bala.
Thank you, sir. You have set the ball rolling. My next question is, today, given that China's Xiaokang border villages also serve as grey zone tools through the integration of military as well as dual-use infra, which you just mentioned, how do you think this accelerated development near disputed areas challenge India's strategic posture? Because additionally, how do you think the ideological framework of Xiaokang encourage border residents to perceive their role as active defenders of the border, in a way blending the traditional values with modern nationalistic sentiments?
Bala, before I set out to the utility of these villages by Chinese, I would like to allude to the Article 7 of the 2005 agreement that India and China had signed on political parameters and guiding principles for the settlement of India-China boundary question. Article 7 states, and I quote, "In reaching a boundary settlement, the two sides shall safeguard due interests of the settled populations in border areas." To my mind, this agreement should have spurred India into consolidation of the border areas, to protect our own interests when arriving at a final boundary settlement. I think if you look at the way we have progressed after having signed the agreement in terms of development of these border areas and integrating them into the Indian growth story, very little has been done, or much could have been done to ensure that this interest of India is protected. So with that as the caveat, I would say that the development of these villages in the border areas by China, in the areas which are vulnerable as perceived by China, or in the proximity of disputed areas or areas where we have differing perceptions, creates potential for any kind of a flashpoint in the future. We have been monitoring these developments along the LAC over a fair amount of time, and these villages which Chinese are developing in the border areas as part of its Xiaokang villages program are under close monitoring. The ability of China to use this infrastructure to billet additional troops in the case of heightened tensions or in the times of conflict is well noted, and therefore when we look at how India perceives it, we look at these as potential areas where China could build up to create flashpoints or to develop threat against us in future. Having said that, it would be appropriate for me to say that such actions by China, which is openly available in the OSCENT through open source satellite imagery, is being taken note of, and the Indian Armed Forces are taking adequate measures to cater for such contingencies if they develop along the LAC. That's what I would like to say. Therefore, China's activities or the PLA activities in these areas are constantly being monitored to identify the way Chinese threat would manifest in times of heightened tensions or conflict. And they give us adequate preparatory period to develop own contingency plans and respond to equally in kind when needed. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you, General. You have raised a very significant point. You mentioned about Article 7 of the 2005 agreement. Let me take you a little bit to speaking of China's land border law, which tasked both the PLA as well as the PAP, which is the People's Armed Police Force, with defending its border. How do you think this will complicate India's border security strategy? And where do you think that our India's Vibrant Villages program stand in all this?
I will take this in two parts. Firstly, the Chinese land border law, which it passed in 2021 in October. I don't think we should get unduly worried about this law or the naming of villages in Arunachal by China or any other area in China, because all these areas where Chinese have either renamed the towns and villages are in occupation by India, and in any case, laws passed by China are not applicable to India. I would like to draw your attention to the statement by the Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Xiaokang, on this aspect. And therefore, to military mind or to even those who are strategically oriented, Chinese land border law is as good as a law for Chinese itself. It only helps China, to my mind, to get its house in order when it comes to border management. And I would also like to draw your attention to the statement by Arindam Bagchi on 27th October 2021, when Chinese had passed this border law. He said, and I quote, China's unilateral decision to bring about a legislation which can have implications on our existing bilateral agreements on border management, as well as on the border question, is of concern to us. However, he said, such unilateral move will have no bearing on the arrangements that both sides have already reached earlier, whether it is on the boundary question or for maintaining peace and tranquility along the LAC in India-China border areas. Therefore, this kind of sums up. While India has taken note of this land border law, it does not come into effect when it comes to existing arrangement that India and China already have. And also, if we refer to the Chinese government's own statement after passing the law, it has stated in no uncertain time, the Chinese state media, that this law will have no bearing on existing arrangement that China has got with its neighbors. Therefore, to my mind, while this is something which we must keep monitoring, I think this is basically an attempt by the Chinese government and especially Xi Jinping to bring certain amount of order in border management. To this, I would also like to allude to certain incident that happened on the land borders and in the maritime areas of China, wherein certain independent actions of PLA have caused embarrassment to the president because of lack of coordination between various agencies, be it on the eastern seaboard or along the land borders. Therefore, it is just an attempt by Xi Jinping to ensure that he is fully in control when it comes to management of the borders, so that there is no situation that is allowed to develop by the PLA which can cause potential embarrassment or escalation. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you, sir. My next question is on, in what way do you think China's emphasis on utilizing civilian villages, to enhance its military capability through its civil-military fusion strategy, which you also mentioned, reflect China's broader national objectives?
I think when you look at the Chinese approach and Indian approach, firstly, let me answer your second question, which I did not, on the Vibrant Village program. The Vibrant Village program of India is a recently launched program. It was launched only recently by the government of India with a 3-year perspective, and it had an outlay of 4,800 crores, a total of 2,967 villages in 460 odd 46 border blocks of 19 districts in 4 states and the Union Territory of Ladakh were affected by this. All these vibrant villages were to be along the northern borders with China. Of these, in phase 1 or in the first phase, 662 villages were identified to be developed on priority. Of these, in the eastern sector, Arunachal had 455 villages, Sikkim had 46, central sector and Himachal we had, that is including Himachal, we had 75, and in Uttarakhand we had total, and Ladakh we had about 35 villages. Altogether 662 villages. Now when you look at the comparison of outlay that Chinese had given, that is 30,000 crores, and India had given 5,000, approximately 4,800 crores, the investment that India is making pales in front of the investment that China has actually made. What was the aim of Vibrant Village program that India has embarked upon? The objectives of Vibrant Village program, as stated by the government, is to identify and develop economic drivers based on local, natural, human and other resources of border villages. Development of growth centers on hub and spoke model through promotion of social entrepreneurship, empowerment of youth and women through skill development and entrepreneurship. Leveraging tourism potential through promotion of social, cultural, traditional knowledge and heritage. And development of sustainable eco-agricultural businesses on the concept of one village, one product through community-based organizations and NGOs. Now, when we look at the approach of Indian government to that of the Chinese government, Chinese approach is a securitized approach wherein they're looking at border through these Xiaokang villages for effective border management. When we look at India's approach is a utopian approach, or I would say a holistic approach, looking at developing these areas to make these areas an integral part of the India's growth story. It does not speak about securitizing the villages against a threat from China. Therefore, the entire approach is different because of the governance models that both India and China follow. Now, coming to your next question of the use of these villages by the Chinese in terms of conflict. Now, when we look at the development of these Xiaokang villages and their proximity to the LAC and the potential areas in which these have come up for possible development of threat along those axes, which are constantly being monitored, any changes in activities, build-up of the PLA or Chinese armed forces, any changes in infrastructure development, and any actions that China takes which are out of the normal come into our notice immediately, either by the observations by the border troops or by use of various surveillance means that are available to the border formations and to the strategic intelligence assessment agencies located elsewhere. So therefore, any attempt by China to use these border villages or Xiaokang villages for developing any kind of threat will come under observation and will give enough time for our formations to respond. Also, having seen these developments for over a period of time, the Indian Armed Forces and the border formation in particular are sensitized to the attempts by the Chinese to use grey zone tactics, which is not covered in any of the bilateral treaties, which is beyond the ambit of the agreement that we have signed, to develop any kind of a threat. So what happened in Galwan, or what happened during that time in the eastern sector or other sectors, is something which is an issue of the past, is a thing of the past. Not that the formations were not aware of those developments. It was something which is a matter of discussion for some other later, probably, conversation. But I would like to say that the developments that the Chinese and the Chinese PLA are making along the border are well taken note of, and contingencies planned and prepared to respond adequately, keeping the escalation in mind.
So my last question is, as China continues to develop its border villages to support its strategic objective, what key activities or critical indicators should, as analysts, monitor to better understand China's evolving approach and capabilities in the region, sir?
See, Bala, when we look at these Xiaokang villages and their how as they sprout up along the LAC, we already have a perception and understanding of what are the areas that possibly China could open up in case of a conflict, notwithstanding the level of conflict. So having understood what are the potential areas where threat could manifest, these areas are under surveillance, and any kind of activities which point towards attempt by China to change the status quo without the use of force, using grey zone tactics, or building up to exercise use of force in areas where it feels that India is potentially weak, are taken note of, and contingency plans are in place. Therefore, while the observations like movement of formations, movement of troops, additional troops, training in this proximity to these areas, and increased activities of the Chinese border personnel or the People's Armed Police or PLA in camouflage of civilian personnel and development of these villages to install surveillance devices, or increased or heightened activities in terms of infrastructure development from these villages towards the LAC, development of any other kind which will assist the Chinese in building its capacity for development of threat along these axes are taken note of. These are something which we must note. And as part of China's attempt to carry out grey zone warfare, any attempt which is other than the normal Chinese military training activities, which don't point directly towards development of a threat, but point towards messaging us that there are other means by which they could possibly generate heightened tensions or develop threat, need to be taken note of. Threat need not necessarily be developed by use of force, and therefore these activities, including visits by senior PLA officers or senior party officials to these villages, and understanding what they have spoken there, which comes out in the local vernacular press, need to be monitored. That's what I would like to say.
Before we conclude, thank you very much, sir, for your invaluable insights. If I may offer my top 3 takeaways for the benefit of our viewers, the Xiaokang villages has not been a new phenomenon. It has been conceived in 1979 by the Deng Xiaoping for upliftment of poor. And this dual use infrastructure of these villages forms a part of China's civil military fusion strategy that can be used in times of conflict. And the dichotomy in approach between India and the Chinese lies in while China takes a securitized approach, India takes a holistic approach targeting development as a part of India's growth story. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A big thank you to our guest, Major General A.T. Prasad, for spending time with us and offering such invaluable insights. To our audience, I hope you found our discussion insightful and thought-provoking. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed. Jai Hind.